Austin Dillon has just been betrayed by NASCAR as the three-member NASCAR Appeals Court dismissed Austin Dillon's petition Wednesday, despite his victory at Richmond Raceway on August 11th. Leaving him outside of playoffs and with only 2 races left, his season seems to be done. Has ruined his own chances in Richmond 2 weeks ago? Dillon won the race after a last-lap altercation in which he spun Joey Logano and then hooked Denny Hamlin, taking the checkered flag and what he thought was an automatic playoff berth for a regular season win. 3 days later, the Richard Childress Racing driver still held the trophy and the winner's pay, but not much more, as NASCAR canceled his automatic playoff berth. Dillon was also fined 25 points in the standings, while his spotter, Brandon Benish, was suspended for 3 races. Benish's ban was lowered to 1 race, and he has already served it by missing last week's race in Michigan. NASCAR regulations permit this choice, since the playoff eligibility standards state, race finishes must be unencumbered by violations of the NASCAR rules or other actions detrimental to stock car auto racing or NASCAR as determined in the sole discretion of NASCAR. According to Jenna Fryer of the Associated Press, Dillon's request to reinstate his playoff eligibility was refused. NASCAR offered the following explanation. NASCAR represents elite motorsports, and as such, its drivers are expected to demonstrate exemplary conduct if its series championships are to be validated. In this case, the line was crossed, the panel said in a statement. The appeal was heard by former NASCAR truck team owner Tom DeLoach, former racing engineer Tommy Wheeler, and Kelly Housby, an executive with a transportation equipment firm. This decision was rough for Dillon as he expressed optimism last week about appealing the decision, which came after a race in which Dillon seemed to be cruising to victory until a yellow was issued with only a few laps remaining. Logano got a solid start on the restart and believed he could hold off Dillon, who ran into turn 3 and spun Logano. Hamlin dove to the inside to pass Logano, and as they raced to the finish line, Dillon caught Hamlin in the right rear. Dillon stated that he was simply mashing the throttle and had no intention of turning Hamlin. "I was just trying to get to him," Dillon told reporters after the race regarding Logano. "I went into turn 3 in 5th gear and drove in, tried to get him loose, got him up the track. I got the car downshifted, and the car actually turned pretty good when I did that. When I was coming back left, the 11 of Hamlin was coming. That was just kind of a reaction. I wasn't lifting at that point because I was more looking at where the 22 of Logano was. When the 11 came across, it was just reaction." According to Hamlin, the statistics clearly indicated that the touch was purposeful. "When he is getting told to come down by his spotter, he is doing what he is told, and then when he sees me, he's probably just trying to make contact," according to Hamlin. "But at that point, I nearly had him cleared. The right rear is just a vulnerable spot and can put you in a bad wreck position." After assessing the punishment last week, NASCAR Senior Vice President Elton Sawyer stated that those actions should not be acceptable for a championship. "The number one thing is that we want to make sure that we are protecting the integrity of our playoffs as well as our championship when we get to the final race at Phoenix," Sawyer told the crowd. "And we want to make sure that our competitors understand. We want them to make all the decisions. We want them to be able to race hard. That's what our sport has been about for 75 plus years. But we also want them to understand, and I believe that each and every one of them understands, that this crossed the line." Dillon, now 29th in the standings, can still enter the playoffs if he wins this weekend at Daytona or the following weekend at Darlington. But if that doesn't work out, RCR is still working on the case in the background. After NASCAR's statement, Richard Childress Racing released their own statement Wednesday after the National Motorsports Appeals Panel upheld the penalty NASCAR imposed on Austin Dillon following his Cookout 400 victory at Richmond. RCR stated that it is disappointed with the judgment and intends to appeal it to the final appeal officer. Richard Childress Racing is disappointed in the results of today's hearing in front of the National Motorsports Appeals Panel. "We respect the NASCAR appeals process, but we do not believe that today's outcome reflects the facts presented. We plan to appeal the decision to the final appeal officer," the statement read. Austin Dillon, RCR will appeal the judgment to the final appeal officer. The appeals panel did, however, reduce spotter Brandon Benish's 3-race sentence to 1 race, indicating that he had already served his suspension after skipping this past weekend's race in Michigan. Benish could be heard saying, "Wreck him," over the radio before Dillon right rear hooked Hamlin into the wall. If Richard Childress Racing even stands a chance remains to be seen, as a NASCAR insider has shared more details about Austin Dillon getting another penalty appeal after losing the first one. On X, a fan questioned Fox Sports' Bob Pockris if the burden of proof is on Richard Childress Racing, RCR, to prove NASCAR was wrong. Yes, the burden of proof in the final appeal is on RCR that the appeals panel erred in their decision, Pockris said. For what it's worth, the appeals panel's standard of proof is more likely than not beyond a reasonable doubt. Pockris also stated that the next appeal is the final one, implying that if Dillon and RCR lose the next round, they will be eliminated from the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs. After the initial appeal was refused, RCR issued a statement. Richard Childress Racing is disappointed in the results of today's hearing in front of the National Motorsports Appeals Panel. We respect the NASCAR appeals process, but we do not believe that today's outcome reflects the facts presented. We plan to appeal the decision to the final appeal officer, the statement read. NASCAR punished Dillon last week for wrecking Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin to win the Cup Series race in Richmond. Dillon retained the victory, but his automatic playoff spot was removed. Dillon and RCR promptly declared their intention to appeal, and the initial appeal was refused. Dillon believes that he and RCR belong in the playoffs. With that appeal, we obviously deserve to be in the playoffs, Dillon stated this past weekend. We want to reverse that decision that NASCAR has made to take our playoff eligibility away. We feel like we have a case to stand on and should. So, Austin Dillon and his crew are once again, and for the last time, appealing NASCAR's decision to withdraw his playoff berth. But this Denny Hamlin has also stepped in. On the Actions Detrimental podcast, Hamlin discussed what Dillon's team is likely to argue in the appeal, and if they even stand a chance. If I'm thinking about what are they going to build a case on, I think it would be really hard to build a case to say it wasn't intentional, so probably that's not their angle, said Hamlin. More likely, it would be of the angle that it's unprecedented that a win has counted but not been eligible for the playoffs. You put in your rulebook that you have a win, and it puts you in the playoffs. I would argue that a little bit because I read some language to you last week that was in the rulebook that when it comes to the kind of fairness of the sport, they can make unprecedented calls. I think what NASCAR is going to defend. Maybe they're not just going to argue that he did it intentionally or not intentionally, whatever it might be. They're probably going to say people have wrecked for the win for quite some time and you've done nothing. This time you chased to take us out of the playoffs and that is unprecedented. Denny Hamlin doesn't know which angle Austin Dillon will take. What NASCAR probably would say was that we saw an unprecedented move and it caused us to make an unprecedented call. That's what I think that both sides are thinking about. I could be totally wrong and they might have some sort of evidence or reasoning behind their appeal. We really don't know what they're appealing. They're going to appeal that this win should count. If you gave us the win should count towards the playoffs. I understand that argument, which is why I said you should have taken care of it at the track. Enforce the rough driving penalty right then everything else just fixes itself. It doesn't have a split outcome. What do you think? Have NASCAR betrayed Austin Dillon? And do they even stand a chance in court with the last attempt of an appeal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.